That's it. I'll turn it off at the end. Okay. We're
Right.
ready.
So, so you're both welcome to the session. I'm with John and Lorna Jackson, and thank you and welcome to the Hypnoanalyst podcast. So basically, you're a dual team of clinical hypnotherapists who've trained people throughout the vast nation of Australia in transpersonal therapy, and basically you're educators. And the genre of therapy you've both developed is called soul regression therapy, and that's the title of your book. Your aim is to guide people to their soul's essence. You train people according to the institutions you founded, including the Jackson Institute, the Academy of Transpersonal Hypnotherapy. And as I mentioned, I read Soul Regression Therapy, and I read John's story, and I read Lorna's story, and then I read everybody else's story, and I was deeply touched. Basically, you can get the book on Kindle and just download it and do it like me. I put marks everywhere, and that's the book. That's a beautiful book. I'm moved by John's story so much because it was pain, John, that would have caused you to fall in love with hypnotherapy, because it ameliorated your pain, and you were paralyzed with pain. Could you talk to me a bit about that, please, for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. About the background with my back and chronic pain. I first injured my back when I was 24 years old, and for a young guy, sort of, who was in the prime of life, it was sort of, and friends were doing things like playing sport and doing other things that young people do at the time. It really sort of curtailed that for me in a way, but I went back to, I was originally in the building profession, and then I went back to building again, and I re-injured my back again and had a second operation, and up to now I've had four lots of back surgery in my life. So when at the time that I was recuperating from surgery, I went and visited a Indian aura healer, of all people, who did some aura healing with me. I'd never experienced anything like that before. I was recommended by some other people I'd met, and he explained to me, he said he could see that I'd had a past life in ancient England, and he could see me going into battle, and I had been dispatched, for want of a better word, or killed by a sword through my lower back. And so that definitely got me interested in past lives, and like, who are we, where do we come from? I'd never really sort of I'd considered it, but and I'd had different things happen to me in my life, but I'd never really gone that deep into things, and it could just spark that interest. But it wasn't until I left New Zealand in 2004 and came to Australia and met Lorna, and Lorna was on a similar sort of path. She'd been on a path of sort of esoteric knowledge, sort of in a deeper way than what I had up till that point. And we then sort of started off and ventured on this journey that we've now developed into soul regression therapy. So it's been, it's just been a full time of awakening for me, really, since 04. I did have an experience in the early 90s of a person dying with my parents present, and I knew the person. Actually, he was an Irishman, of all people, and he then turned up in my bedroom. I was in a share house with some friends, and he turned up in my bedroom, and he came to say, he just said, "Oh, I've just come." I asked him if it was him because he looked rather skeletal in appearance, and he said, "Yes, I've come to say goodbye." So I had that encounter with spirit prior to meeting with Lorna, and again, I knew from there that there was life after death, and I couldn't dispute that to deep inside myself, and so from that journey in 2004 till now, this whole thing's really opened right up for me, and I've, through doing regression work and also having regression work done on me personally, I've come to really, fully believe in reincarnation. I have no fear of death anymore. It's just been an amazing journey. That's all I can say, really, Michael.
No, John, it's very tempting just to go to Lorna's story first, because we're presented with Lorna's story, and Lorna's story is quite fascinating, but there's very important things in John's story. I'm thinking that I was also once a 24-year-old man in my prime, and I would have hated to have experienced that pain. You were a builder. But in view of the OxyContin crisis, where like people have been taking these pills for pain, and it's basically morphine pill, and that, thank goodness you discovered hypnosis. But hypnosis, it shouldn't surprise us that, like, Mesmer, Pysegur, Braid, he was amputating people, and he was producing hypnoanesthesia and hypnoanalysia. My point is simple, is that there's a lot of repressed information about hypnotherapy that people don't know, and I think that it's really touching that it's really comforting that hypnosis kind of saved your sanity by giving you back health. Isn't that right?
Yes.
That at least it gave you back the ability to cope with pain.
Well, it did.
So that's a really
when I first met Lorna, I had an episode with chronic pain that was really debilitating, and I was told that I was probably looking at needing some surgery done at that stage. And Lorna said, "Well, why don't we just try some hypnosis?" And I thought, "Oh well, let's give it a go." And she did the session with me, and within 10 minutes, the pain that I'd been experiencing and the muscle spasming had completely cleared up, and I was able to walk freely. I'd gone into that session. My son had to drive me there because I couldn't drive my car. I was in that much pain. So after that session, I was able to move and walk freely. So and with the medication side of things, I've always been I was taken down a path of medication through a pain clinic situation in New Zealand, and I then basically it was turning me into a zombie. Like, I was waking up at 10 o'clock in the morning feeling just completely spaced out, and then I was ready to go back to bed by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I then once I sort of could realize what was happening, I then put all the medication that I had into a box, and I took it back to the pain clinic, and I said, "Look, if this is the way that I'm meant to lead my life moving forward," I said, "here's all your pain medication back. I'd rather put up with the pain, thanks very much." And so and that's what I did. I walked out of there, and I walked away. When I left New Zealand, I walked away from my compensation payments, from everything, because I just didn't want to live that life no more. Being bound to a system, being bound to medication in any way. It was just, I could call it an epiphany, call it what you like, but it was a decision I made.
And John, are you a New Zealander?
A what?
Yeah.
Are you in New Zealand?
Are you from New Zealand?
Yes.
Yes, originally from New Zealand, that's right.
Yeah, so you have the Maori people and the Aborigine people in these countries, and maybe, I don't know if they have any relationship to past life regression, or their own indigenous healing somehow have that connection.
Yeah, well, I did have a strong. I met a professor in Whakatane in New Zealand who, at the time, he spoke. We were just discussing life and my background, and when I was young, I used to go to. I used to snorkel dive for shellfish in where I lived in Wellington, and there was an island there that had a strong Maori connection to it, and I ended up leaving Wellington and I moved to a place, moved to the Bay of Plenty, and in the Bay of Plenty, it's the place of homecoming for Maori people, because the canoes that came from the islands all landed along that coastline in the Bay of Plenty. And yeah, he basically said to me at the time, well, you were the energy from where you were as a child. Now you've come to this place to live. It's like a journey of completion for you. And I didn't know at that time. I never even looked at that side of things, to be honest, Michael. But I was strongly affected by that. And I've, coming here to Australia, I've been well aware of the power of the Indigenous energy in Australia as well, and I've always honoured that energy here, because it does have such a strong spirit of the land energy. It's an imprint, for want of a better word.
Do a lot of dowsing.
Yeah, and I do. I am a dowser, so I use dowsing rods or pendulums or whatever. But I always clear. I've cleared houses and spaces and so forth, and I'm always aware of that land energy, that spirit energy.
It just goes to show you, John. You can, like in my mind, it was always going to be Lorna first and John, but like John's story is so rich in detail, and it's worth expanding upon. I mean, the idea of pain, it's such an issue. But Lorna's story also has a medical team in it. So, like with you was to do with pain, and you actually turned away from pain. But with Lorna's story, it comes actually matrilineally. It's vis-a-vis. You're both baby boomers, and that her mother was. You were born in Blackpool. Was it Blackpool you grew up in? But it was in Turkey. I know these names, Lorna, because of soccer team. But basically, your mum was swimming, I think, and
oh yeah,
were bombing, and people died. That's and that would have generated trauma, I'm sure.
Yes, my mother had a history of mental illness. Yeah, and she was in the ATS in the war, and she was stationed down in, I think it was Torquay or down, down south. And there was an incident where they were on leave and they were on the beach with a friend. And this, she used to tell me this story that a German bomber plane flew over and started, shooting people in the open, swimming and on the beach. And at that point, her and a friend ran and hid underneath a boat or something. And they were so close to being killed, and that was her only encounter with the frontline war bombing shooting, because she was, she never went overseas. She was in the ATS, which is the Women's Land Army. They were helping and so forth, the soldiers in Britain. But, that was trauma, that was shock, but, they didn't have any treatment for them back then. This is back, in the 40s. And then she'd also had a trauma from childhood as well. So it was all compounding trauma through her life, which ended up, she became agoraphobic. And as a child, I'm an only child, so I was very much kept wrapped in cotton wool, and, the world was unsafe. I was never, you know, encouraged to do it much or had many friends because my mother had all these, you know, internal fears from her childhood and what had happened to her. And then we eventually we emigrated to Australia because my father died when I was 15. He had cancer, so she was propelled to be more independent. But this trauma was, you know, never went away because she never really had sought help. And I guess in a way that was a signpost for me because I always wanted to understand her and why was she like this and what was the cause, and you know, because I was never like her. I was very independent. I wanted to go out and do stuff, but she tried so much to hold me back, but only from the, you know, to protect me. But it's interesting how, you know, things turned out and I ended up being a therapist, but I could never help my mother. You know, as a therapist, we come to that conclusion that you can't really help your family. I helped John, but I didn't really know him that well when we first met. Mm-hmm. But my mother, I could never really, you know, she was old school, and which is a shame, really. But it helped me to understand, you know, how childhood trauma. I mean, obviously, I couldn't do any past life regression with her, but I started past life regression because I was really interested in what happens to us when we die. But you see, my mother had kept me sheltered. She would never talk about anything. And coming from Blackpool, Lancashire, back in the 50s, that it was not even known, you know. And in the book, I wrote that, you know, I saw a movie on television, on the old black and white TV when I was probably about 11 or 12. And it was the movie Bridie Murphy by, you know, Maury Bernstein. It's a very famous story and book. So that was my introduction to the concept of past lives. And I went and asked my mother, I said, what is this, you know? Oh, no, you don't need to know about that. I mean, it's such an English thing to say, you know, don't ask questions. It's just a movie, it's just fantasy. But, you know, I just put it back in the back of my mind and I thought, no, there's something there. What is this? I'm going to research this when I get an opportunity. I mean, I'm only a child here. We didn't have books like there are today. There was no internet or anything. So it wasn't until many, many years later that I was in Australia and, you know, I'd been married. You know, I'd left my husband. It was back in the, when was that? I've just lost track of time. In the 90s, that's right. Because we emigrated to Australia, to Brisbane in 1966. And I was married, I had a daughter and so forth, and then eventually broke off with my husband like 20 odd years later. And I was, you know, I started to research, you know, spirituality with what I was able to find. I found books by Edgar Casey and Shirley MacLaine, you know, Garage Sales. We both read the same books around the same time.
Yeah, look. Shirley MacLaine's Out on a Limb, and I think there was a follow-on to that somewhere. Right. Yeah, we both read that book around the same time, so yeah. And
I did a class on auras, you know, just not far from where I lived. I was down at, I lived just outside of Brisbane. Mm. We've got lots of synchronicities, John and I, which is, you know, we see them as signposts along the way. To help us to realize that we're spot on where we're meant to be on our path. Because the place where I went to do this little class on studying auras, little village, John had actually came over, probably not much after that.
Yeah, I was there in about 92.
Yeah, it was around the same time, but we didn't know each other then. And he actually stayed in that village with a friend, came out from New Zealand. And he actually drove past the house where I was living with my family, unbeknown to both of us.
I'm happy at the time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, I was questing because I'd hurt my back. I had a spinal injury similar to John, different circumstances. Oh. But, you know, and that spinal injury really held me back. Sorry?
Was that because of the truck accident? The spinal injury? No,
it wasn't, but it could be connected to it. But no, I was very interested in horses and I'd fallen off quite a few. If you're going to ride horses, you're going to fall off. And eventually I damaged my lower back and I had a lot of pain. So I went and had spinal surgery. So I had a fusion about 92, 93. And, you know, so I was recovering from that, similar to John, but John had quite a few surgeries, but never a fusion. So when we met, we had a lot of, you know, similarities. It was just quite astounding how similar we were.
There's similarities in the stories as well. Like, I mean, with your mother, she had to tranquilizers, and you know, like there's always this battle with medication, and you're talking about esoterical knowledge, and like I'm still shocked by the fact that she actually, you know, the stiff upper lip associated with Britain, yes, was telling you how the traumatogenesis of her suffering, phobias, agoraphobia, all to do with the manifestations of trauma. But we're talking about, you may not know, but hypnoanalysis or psychoanalysis, the abbreviated fragmented psychoanalysis used throughout the British Army, but obviously your mother did not receive this treatment, and also narcoanalysis. They were injecting narcotics into soldiers. There was no profit in your mother this treatment because she wasn't going to be turfed back to the trenches or to the you know, in these wars. It's moving for me because I think she was overprotected because you obviously were so precious to her after all of the slaughter that we see throughout this horrible Second World War.
Absolutely.
You know? And that's why she was overprotected.
She was terrified of the war and the fear of the Germans, you know.
And you know, I also focus on what's missing. Like did your father die at 15, and was he involved in the war? And what was the genesis of his heart failure? No.
My father didn't go to war because his father, my grandfather, they had quite a bit of money and they had a big house, and he was one of the first people to have a car of the day. He was a radio operator on a ship, and he was the second person in the world to contact America on that radio ham. That's what they used to call it. Radio. That's right. And he was quite well known. But he used to, he had market gardens. They had greenhouses where they grow vegetables, tomatoes and lettuces and so forth. So my father worked for his father. And if you worked on the land in England when the war was on, you were not really allowed to go to war because they had to have the farmers there to feed the people. So he got an exemption, so he didn't go to war. But my parents met when the war was on, and then they married in 1945, the year the war ended. So no, my father didn't get influenced in the way that my mother did with any trauma, but he passed away. He had colon cancer, and he worked for the ICI, which is a big factory in Blackpool, just outside of Blackpool. And years later, we discovered that there was a big cell of people, a lot of people who worked there who ended up with colon cancer, different cancers from working with the plastics, and they were, you know, caused a lot of deaths.
Yeah.
But we didn't know this until many years later because we'd already gone to Australia. My father died in 1966. So he died pretty much rapidly within 3 months. And he died in the March, and then we were on a ship to Australia in the July because my mother's sister had already previously emigrated with her husband and daughter to Brisbane with the emigration, you know, the 10-pound pom, and they'd come to Australia 8 years beforehand. So my mother wanted to have a new life, you know, a new chapter, so to speak. Even though she had agoraphobia, she was quite a pioneer to actually do that. But she did it within a safety area where my auntie came over to Australia, her sister.
Came to England.
Yeah, came to England, and then she came back with us on the ship. So, and then we stayed with them. So my mum did it in like a comfort safety zone, and it was challenging for her. But, you know, it was difficult back then in Australia for a single woman, you know, and so forth. She had to work. She hadn't worked for years. It was rather difficult for both of us, really, with the trauma, because neither of us had processed any trauma in a proper way, you know.
Yeah. So it stayed with her. The war, the ghosts of the war, the traumas were never fully exorcised from her, and it just stayed with her throughout her entire life.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's generational, isn't it? It's ancestral, you know, it gets passed down.
And interestingly enough, Michael, in our family background, Lorna coming from Blackpool, my father came from Preston in Lancashire.
Yeah.
And Lorna's grandfather, was he great-grandfather?
Yeah, my great-grandfather.
Yeah, Lorna's great-grandfather was an architect, and he was from Preston. And my family in Preston were builders and bricklayers. They had a business there, the same name as me, called John Jackson and Sons, which is my great-grandfather. And so my great-grandfather, he founded a lodge in Preston as well. And no doubt, Lorna's great-grandfather being an architect, and you know, the builders, they probably would have come across each other or crossed paths at some stage in their lives. So we had that connection there as well, going back to Britain.
So there's a soul lineage connection between us. It's like us when we take it back to the soul level, that on a soul level, before we incarnated into this reality, you know, we've contracted to come together later in life and to have the experiences that we've had in order to come together to do the work that we're doing.
Yeah. And my grandfather, he served in World War One and was mustard gassed in World War One, and then that affected him, and he couldn't go to World War Two, but he was in the bomb disposal in Preston, so they used to have to dig up the unexploded bombs that had the timers in them and defuse those bombs. And my dad told me, he says, that his father couldn't climb a ladder. Well, if he did climb a ladder, he'd be shaking on the ladder, because they used to have to dig they'd dig down to get the bombs, and they'd have to go up and down via a ladder. So, but he said even afterwards, because his dad was a bricklayer, if he ever went up a ladder, he'd be shaking on the ladder. And that was from the post-traumatic stress from the bomb disposal.
Yeah, there's a lot of connection with war. And it's interesting, though, because my daughter is actually married
An
ex-military
Australian military,
and he's had a war injury as well. And
yeah, I mean, like Australia have been involved in their fair share of campaigns. Or I know Gallipoli with Mel Gibson, God, and then maybe they were involved in Vietnam, and they're probably involved in another campaigns as I would. Maybe they were involved in Iraq or Afghanistan, but
East Timor, East Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan.
Well, David was in Iraq and
he served in Iraq and Afghanistan,
and he was blown up by a landmine, and he nearly lost his leg. So
you can see why past life regression is such a vital thing for these soldiers coming back. They usually end up, especially in America, they usually end up unemployed or drinking on welfare and being completely neglected by the system. Basically, then you move on to chapter 3, and you give wonderful explanations of the subconscious mind, which I didn't necessarily come across when I was studying psychoanalysis, like you said, that the subconscious mind is a complex system with many programs running. That's interesting. Basically, then we get a fair share of case histories, and it's sort of like it's not like the fighting case histories. It's all full on. It opens up to the whole subconscious mind, and I'm just thinking it's all, of course, from the clinical point of view. Were you ever curious? Do you think that it could have a forensic application? Could soul therapy be done on criminals, on psychopaths, on people that are actually offenders, or on drug users? And what would you think of that, Lorna? Would that be something you would, or John, would you like that? Would you not like that?
Well, yes, I guess.
To see it being used in prison.
Yeah, I could see that it could potentially have a benefit for criminals to look beyond to their past lives, to understand why they acted like they did and so forth. You know, but I don't think mainstream are going to accept, you know, the prisons and so forth.
I'd say that.
It's a long way off. But, you know, some psychologists in Australia do use past life regression, and they may already be using that as a therapy, but they wouldn't advertise it or make it known. With David, and I'm back to David, who our son-in-law, who was in the war and almost lost his leg. I did a past life regression on him, and he, because he didn't really know about it much until he met us and my daughter, and he went back to a past life where he's had many war lives and lost a limb, lost the whole leg, you know. So it really helped him to come to terms with what's happened in this life. And I think it helped him to put pieces of his life together. But in regard to criminals, I mean, yeah, but a lot of the criminals, they're not, as you know, you're a hypnotherapist, they can be very difficult to work with. And if they're psychopaths, they often don't want to. They don't want to look, you know, do they?
Yeah.
To themselves.
I would have agreed with you, but then I then see, like, just my mind always gets sort of like, oh my goodness. And then I come across a book called Rebel Without a Cause, and I hear it's actually about a hypnoanalyst that actually treated it in soldiers receiving this therapy, as opposed to the people that are on the far side in terms of morality. When I read Born in the 4th of July, I read maybe 50 or 60 pages. I watched the movie, every single page crying, because Ron Kovach's trauma was so raw, so profound. And I'm thinking that this therapy is really, really required for soldiers.
Yeah.
The raw pain they're going through, and
yes, soldiers.
that encounter with death.
Yeah.
And I hear, like, the more dead bodies you see, the more you're going to get traumatized. So it's not a healthy environment. Nothing can prepare the mind for war. And if you're a young man who's 7 or 8 years of age, you're more likely to not really think of the ramifications and just go out there and get yourself and put yourself into even more danger, you know. So it's absolutely horrific. And I'm sure that soul therapy will be required for these people.
Well,
you know?
I'd agree, Michael. And I'd also add that to that, I guess, from a psychotherapeutic point, that these soldiers that have gone to war and fought in war have been that they're institutionalized by psychology that's been applied for, you know, since modern psychology, I'm talking about since the 1900s, so, and expanded upon over that time. So, you know, they're psychologically profiled as individuals via their military training, and whatever psychology that needed to be applied has been applied to them. And that's a lot of, and that's ingrained and repeated through much the same way that the educational system repeatedly ingrains a system systematically into a child, and it's done via punishment or via you know, rules that are applied backed up by punishment, right? So the role of a psychologist in or anybody practicing in a psychotherapeutic manner with people that have been institutionalized has to realize that, and also has to be able to have the skills to unravel that type of ingrained process that's been applied to those people. So once that's been put out of the way, then you've got a more open mind that's more receptive to and doubt, and not doubting what you're saying as a therapist, that that might be beneficial towards them. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, John, I'm just thinking of Dulcietta Cor Est Pro Patria Mari. That's that poem I had to read it when I was a young kid of 15, and it's like how they were manipulated into believing that, to be patriot, to die for your country. And if you watch Born the 4th of July, like, he really was patriotic. He really wanted to go off to Vietnam, and then he comes back, and most of his body, including his manhood, is gone. But I think, John, from reading Soul Regression Therapy, that your therapy can break through resistance. It can break through. It doesn't have to deal with the bog standard resistance that you get in psychoanalysis. And the other thing that comes to my mind is, what is it? Yeah, that institutionalization. When you already treated successfully 2 ladies that were fully institutionalized, talk to me about their experiences of soul regression therapy.
We just lost you. You just broke up at our end.
Yeah, you treated successfully nuns, and nuns, as you know, are fairly institutionalized people. Yeah. So that's why I have no doubt that with your tools you can treat anyone. But maybe I've been overly optimistic, but maybe you can talk to me a bit about the nuns and their institutionalization and their recovery.
Well, yeah, look, I think the difference with the nuns that I saw, and I have seen a few over the years, is they have willingly, well, they've left the religion. They've gone absolutely anti. They've gone against it because of the way they were treated, and they were treated quite harshly by the priests. Whereas what is the difference between the nuns and the soldiers? Well, they were really open, and they were already spiritual. So they've already been, you know what I'm saying? They're already spiritual, whether they believe in the what we believe as regression and reincarnation. They go looking and questing once they've left for something higher, something more. Whereas the soldiers are generally not spiritual at all, and they've been so harshly conditioned, as we are as children with the schooling system, and then to go straight into the military. It is different, but I mean, obviously not all nuns want to go and do reincarnation, regression. But I was, I was fortunate to attract those nuns, and they both had really profound sessions. I can't remember the whole details because that was quite a while ago now. You're probably it's more fresh in your mind than it is mine with their stories. Now we've lost you.
Yeah, it's okay.
I think that's the difference.
There's good stories in the book. I mean, we have stories of people recovering from is it like Parkinson's disease, and you write in the book that we don't even know what the causes of Parkinson's disease are. So, like, what I would say is that there's also that brain. You talk about institutionalization, but there's also that institutionalization in relation to medical orthodoxy, where we believe that everything the doctor says, everything that empiricism says, must be correct. But yet there are so many conditions that medicine can't even penetrate, and that doesn't, and that's obvious in things like arthritis, joint pain, asthma. You know what I mean?
I think
it's so basically we should talk about that.
Yeah, I think you touched upon it before in regards to soul regression therapy, that it does have the ability to put those factors aside of the institutionalization and get through to the inner core issues. Now, and I believe as a therapist that it doesn't matter all roads lead to Rome, and if you can get that resolution in therapy, and it doesn't matter if it comes from the person themselves as a metaphoric story, and the mind is, as you may, as you probably understand, the mind is very good at presenting metaphors instead of the story to avoid trauma. Now, I believe that when you're working with somebody in therapy, whether the story of the past life is an actual past life, or is it a metaphor for resolution of their problem that the actual subconscious mind is spinning out, as long as you work with that story effectively and explore all facets of the story and bring that story to a resolution and a healing, and the person afterwards reports back that they no longer have the symptoms that they had prior to coming in for the session, then that's a success. And I've always believed that as a therapist.
He's gone. He's frozen. He might come back.
Michael's deep in thought.
He is.
Yeah, but I can still hear you.
You can still hear him.
No, I'm still here. I'm still here.
You froze with a pen.
You froze with a pen in your head.
But I must be. I don't know if yeah. What I regard is that the body actually stores a lot of the crap that we have. Which might sound weird, but that it's not like the. And Western medicine doesn't understand that, and they're always trying to kind of like polarize the mind and the body, and the mind is very different than the body. But I think that maybe through the body, all of the regressions, right to at least to birth, I've never done past life, that it goes through feelings, it goes through emotions, and then it can go to anywhere. And what is repressed or what is not being recalled can actually be recalled, and that's the magic of therapy for what we do as hypnotherapists.
Yeah.
Well, the subconscious is the mind of the body. The subconscious is in charge.
So basically,
I was just saying the subconscious mind is the mind of the body. So it is the body. The subconscious is the body. It's way more than that, but it is the body as well. So when you get an ache or a pain in your body, it's your subconscious mind telling you, trying to get your attention that there's a problem. So, if once we're accessing the subconscious, and if you can help the subconscious to understand the story that created the problem, which can be a past life, well, then it can very easily heal that part of the body. It can change that problem or whatever it is the client came for. As you probably know that.
in the past life stories, some people, they get killed in have the misfortune of being witches at a time when the Malleus Maleficarum was written, and they end up burnt at the stake. Terrible, some not so pleasant things happen.
Absolutely.
To your clients. I'm which contrasts with the ancient past life was just perfect, and that was like utopia, like the Garden of Eden. But what we do, I think, you say it's ancient. I just have to agree with you that of course it's ancient. The Asclepians seem to have been able to provide their patients with miracles, whereas the people who were into Hippocratic medicine, they were very much so bog standards, so Asclepian temples, and you had to get your body incubated into the sleeping temple and have a healing dream, and then a person would interpret that. I want to know, does dream interpretation play a role in soul regression therapy and lucid dreams, which is what I came across from Abby Faria?
Well, I think the dreams are from the subconscious, and they can be past life stories and memories coming through in dreams. So if my client comes in for a past life regression and they've been having this dream or recurring dream, well, then I would ask them about the dream and to tell me what the story is. And then the chances are that that dream, you know, is a past life that we can look at. But when I do past life regression and the person has passed away in the in that life that we've just looked at, and then they go over to the soul state, well, that's the state where and then they connect to their higher self. Well, then if the client wants me to, then I can ask about the dream and is it a past life? I can ask the higher self to tell me and to let the client inform the client, you know, this dream that Susan's been having, is it connected in some way to a past life? Can you share with her what was that about? And often then they'll show the past life. You know, they'll go back then spontaneously, oh yeah, I'm here now. Well, tell me what's going on, and then go through the dream so we can process that. So it's not necessarily just a dream, it is an actual life. And it will be no doubt connected to their theme or issue that they came for to resolve, you know, to have the session in the first place. So sometimes we look at multiple lives. I don't just look at one past life. We may look at quite a few different lives that connect to the central problem or issue that the client came to see me for. But with my therapy, a little bit different is what I do at the end. I don't just look at the past lives. I also connect to the current life as well. And I try to help the subconscious of the client, like in this life, to understand that those past lives are past, but that theme or that problem has been brought over into the current life. So say they've had a pain or an ache or something, I help them to identify where it began, because generally there's a cause for everything. And I mean, the pain's generally a psychosomatic pain if we're going to be able to remove it. It's in the psyche. So I can help them to think, well, when did it start in the current life and what was going on? And often there's a trigger, something happened to re-trigger that pain or problem, because it's trauma. There's trauma, maybe child, you know, abuse of some type. And after that, they developed an allergy to cats, or they ended up with an ache in their hip or whatever. And I can help that part of them in the current life to understand that this has been carried over from a past life as well, and to let it all go. So I can do a little release, a therapeutical release with the client as well. So it just depends what reason they've come for, what is the issue. I mean, you did that session with Kathy. What was the Penny? So Penny in the book is the first story that we talk about, and John did that past life regression with Penny, and she had that rash on her skin.
No, she had rosacea.
She had rosacea, and John helped her. Yeah.
Yes, with the face. Yeah.
And he helped her because to understand, I mean, it was triggered in the current life by, I mean, she had all these autistic children. She had, and similar to yourself, and she had about 4 autistic children or Asperger's. And she also found out that her husband had that as well, and he hadn't told her.
That's right.
And she had lived a lot of trauma with the children, and she was suicidal.
Plus she had a traumatic childhood herself.
She did. She'd had trauma as well, a feeling of a mother not wanting her to be around, and ignoring being left alone, and then taking on other children later on. So she had a lot of trauma, and the outward of that was this skin condition. But we also tracked it back to John tracked it back to past lives as well, and really found the cause.
Yeah.
And especially when she came back for the second session, because she did a life between life session with John as well. And that gave a much, a more overall glimpse of her whole soul's journey in the afterlife. But before she came to John, I actually did a past life with her, and that's in the book as well. Because I recommended this client to John, because John was studying at the time and he needed a really good client for his case studies. And I said, well, you know, this lady's awesome. She just goes into hypnosis easily. She's very easily to go into a past life. So we got her back in. She was quite happy to come in. And John then did the past life with her and the life between life session. But when I was writing up the story for the book, I realized that because I was listening to her talking in the regression, and I realized she was describing the past life that I'd done with her, which was probably over 6 months prior to when John saw her. Now, she consciously would have forgotten about that because there was so much detail, and she started to relay all this detail of this first past life to John while she was in hypnosis in the soul state.
Plus another past life came up that
Yes,
she didn't discuss with you.
That's right. And she was connecting them and making all these, you know, connections and understanding, because this was her higher self, her higher wisdom.
But she also knew, after doing the afterlife session, she knew exactly where her children in today's life, in her current life, in present, connected to those past lives and who they were and who their soul names were. You know, just an amazing recall of, and also her past life as what was the child's name that came to Sydney on the boat from Ireland, I think.
She did.
And she, Mary Margaret O'Connor or something like that, her name was, she traced that past life through records back to in Sydney, and that person existed.
Yes, she found the character that she was.
Yeah, she actually found that character, so that was amazing.
That's the guilt and pain on chapter 15.
Chapter 15, yeah.
You have to be a somnambulist to be good at this. Like, say it was, yeah.
Yeah, she's what we call a level 5. So she's right up at the top range of a client you would deal with for this type of work.
Yeah, she was an ideal client, and she described it. She was there living it. She wasn't looking at it from a distance. She was there. I mean, when the first scene was when she was, you know, she was on the ship and she was describing the clothing and her father and the bow in her hair and the view of Sydney Harbour, you know. I mean, she would describe the smell of the ocean, the salt, everything. She
described the death of her mother in Ireland from what would have been the consumption, you know, the old tuberculosis. So, you know, things just lined up. And then this woman was just your average, you know, she was just a housewife with from an Australian housewife for all intents and purposes. She had never really explored anything like this before, apart from doing that session with Lorna already.
No, she'd gone to a psychic fair, and the psychic did a reading for her and said, oh, you've got so much past life stuff you need to resolve. I recommend you go and find yourself a past life regression therapist. And she didn't really know that they existed. So anyway, she went on Google and she found me, gave me a call, and then came along and I did the past life with her, which really helped and shifted a lot of her problems and also the skin problem. But then, like I said, when John was looking for a student, a case, I recommended her.
And when we wrote the book and we decided to include that story, we contacted her, and then that we hadn't had any contact from her or feedback. And she wrote a fabulous.
She wrote a really good review, and it's in the book. It's whether you want me to read it out for you, but she said she found major issues from 3 previous lives had collided in this life. And although the lives were very different, the issues were similar. And all the guilt that I had carried for so long, now she means around the children, in fact, not mine to carry. And once I was able to identify this, it was easy to overcome. And I now have a completely different way of looking at things. I'm far more laid back, and the complexities of some of my relationships now make perfect sense. she actually divorced that husband and remarried, and she had another child with who was normal. And but she still carried the guilt, you see, from the previous relationship and the children. So she was able to let that go, and a rash went away, and she's now just living a normal life, basically. They tend to just get on, you know.
As an autism father, which is what I am, what strikes me is that her own, I mean, I'm completely involved, and he's non-verbal, and that's why you mentioned clairvoyancy. I'm thinking I'm developing that because I'm always trying to interpret what my son is saying. But like for me, what was unpalatable was the fact that the dad was not completely involved with the children. So like if you're going to be a substitute, you're going to be staying on the sidelines. That's just not going to work if you're around a child with needs, because they need you to be completely and utterly focused on them. But she also said that they didn't give any love back. But my own child is so affectionate, and he's quite hilarious. So that's something that I'm taking from that. There's something else that comes to my mind, like that, like by ameliorating their symptoms. I mean, Rosita was quite painful and quite socially embarrassing. So it was a great gain for her as well. But there's something else that I don't think we mentioned presenting conditions, but there's something else, isn't there? When like that, it's like you're also helping people to come to terms with the fact that we all are kind of born in this body. It's going to leave. We're mortal. So there's a type of a deep therapy where we're able to make sense of this life, which possibly makes us a little bit more calm if we can actually make sense of why we're here, what's the purpose of life, what is the meaning of life. You're not going to get that from your bog standard CBT, which is what they're doing in the prisons.
Not at all. No. It helps people. And I see a lot of people who come to look for their life purpose, you know, and by reflecting back over their past lives, it really can help them. I mean, a lot of people go back to a past life where they wasted their life. You know, they just didn't do anything when they could have. They stayed in a relationship, or they allowed things to happen to them when they actually could have changed it, and like they gave up. So when they see themselves in these past lives and they think, oh, I'm repeating this, you know, I'm just stuck in this relationship. I need to change my job. I need to take control and responsibility for my life. Otherwise, it's going to end up just the same. And at the end of it, you know, I'm going to be miserable.
And I also look at it, Michael, that we've got this thing called, I call it, for want of a better word, generational karma. And that generational karma can be something that your parents weren't very good with dealing with, and it's been passed on to you. And if you don't deal with it, eventually you'll react or conduct your life in a very similar manner to your parents, and then that will pass on to your children until one of them resolves and decides to break that what I call that generational karma, and draw a line under it and totally change it and decide to conduct themselves in a totally different way to what's been conditioned into them through a family line, and which is like what I call the generational karma. And it's very similar in a way to that theme of the past life regression, except it's just this reoccurring theme that goes through a family, whether it's multiple years of relying on the state for money. So you've got generations of people that have never worked in their lives, that the whole family's always relied on unemployment benefits or whatever. Or you might have alcoholism that's in a family and it's gone on for generations, and so forth. So past lives are a very similar thing. You know, that if there's an unresolved conflict that's in there and it's never been resolved or never been dealt with, it will keep coming back, and you have to repeat that life again in order to get an opportunity to resolve it. Whether your soul has evolved to that level where it's prepared to deal with that, eventually you'll have to be confronted with dealing with that. Now, you can expand on that further and onto a quantum level, and it could be occurring multiple times. While we're still living in this lifetime now, we could be,
there's another version of ourselves somewhere else doing it slightly different.
Yeah.
It just, there's so much scope with this. He's frozen again.
Other comes to my mind. I mean, like the destruction of the Holocaust, the war. You had the Holocaust in the Second World War. You had the atom bomb, and I think that Oppenheimer even quoted was the Bhagavad Gita when during the those experiments he did in the Manhattan Project and all that destruction. And so I'm thinking of that. I'm thinking of logotherapy with Viktor Frankl, where he survived Auschwitz, and he developed a therapy based on logos, and his whole work was based on the wake of the Holocaust. God help us. So you have all of this death, this destruction, and basically, I would imagine, even especially now with all of the, like, you hear of mass shootings in America. There's still war going on in the Ukraine. We've got people who still may want to use this nuclear war. That people are probably thirsty to make sense of destruction and to actually make a deeper sense of a deeper meaning. And I'm thinking the more people that are getting therapy, maybe I sound like a utopianist, which I never would have sounded before in my life, but maybe the more people that get therapy, the more we're going to move people away from offender behavior, criminal behavior, pathological behavior, addictive behavior.
Yes.
Yes. That's what I'm putting out.
Yes, it wakes people up. There's more to them than they realize. It does. It makes them.
I think you're giving people hope.
Yes.
Because you also introduce your afterlife. So maybe, people will think, well, you know what, there's something after this life. So if I act like a jerk, I'm going to end up on this lower plane, which is what you mentioned. But if I improve myself, I can actually, raise myself up again and hopefully go to a place more heavenly,
Yeah, I think Earth is a difficult place, and I think it's meant to be like it is. It's a school, it's a testing ground. We come here as souls to challenge ourselves, and there's realities and realms that we do go to, but I think to be on Earth is a real big challenge. So if you put your hand up to come here, you must be evolved to some level.
Exactly.
To be here, even if you're used, that we might think they're unevolved, they're actually unevolved only here as a soul. They're not. They're here for other reasons that we can't always know why. And I mean, so many people want to fix people and to make them change. But really, at the end of the day, we can't know what that soul's journey is about and why they've reincarnated, So I think past life regression and soul regression therapy helps people to own their own stuff and get out of other people's business as well. And
also you've got to look at other cultures in the world too, Michael, that they seemingly don't have a lot, or from a Western perspective, we view, they're viewed as not having a lot, but in actual fact, they're far more happier than people that are on the daily grind in the Western world and wondering, that have all of they're shouldering all the everyday problems of mortgages and rent and car payments and what have you. And there's people in the world that don't have any of that, that would aspire to want that, but are actually far happier than people in the Western world. So yeah, it's a strange contrast.
Yes, I think it helps you to see the matrix that we're in, which we believe it is, and you might not be able to get out of the matrix, but you can be aware that you're in it, and you can make changes in your life so you're not so much influenced by it.
Yeah.
And I think past life regression and life between lives, which is both soul regression therapy, is a really good way to give you that perspective and to see things slightly differently, does that make sense what we're saying?
Lorna, Yeah. Like, I think that you must realize that people are bloody thirsty for this. They're bloody thirsty for this. During the COVID-19, I started listening to podcasts. I started listening to Louis Theroux's podcast and then Leah Remlin. I just discovered that so many people, as opposed to going to something like past life or soul regression therapy, they are thirsty for these answers, and they end up going to cults. And so I ended up going on this rabbit hole where I learned a lot about cults and how horrific it is, and how there are places where that we think we're living in democracy, but once you join a cult, you no longer are a member of society. You're no longer a taxpayer. You're completely out on a limb. But the reasons why I think people join cults like the Rajneeshpuram, Parem, the family, so on and so forth, is that they are thirsting for esoterical knowledge, but they're not getting it in a safe place. Whereas soul regression therapy is a safe place because it comes from you, the subject. It doesn't come from the other, which is things they're the prophet, or somebody who's clearly not in their sane mind, But people are thirsty for your therapy.
Yeah.
There's a thirst.
Yeah, it's a client-centered therapy, Michael. So it's not about the therapist directing the client in any way. It's about the therapist listening to the story and being an investigative journalist, for want of a better word, and asking the probing questions to elicit the story more, and bringing that out and allowing the person, as you say, to explore their own self. And while in that deep hypnotic trance, or in a deep hypnotic state, and to and they greatly benefit from that. And as we've shown in the book, and we have we've recorded that book we just selected, of course, some outstanding ones, but we have I don't know, there must be 1,500 or more recorded programs with, sessions that we've kept. So
that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've been doing this for nearly 20 years, so there's a lot of sessions we've done. And we've also been to India twice. We were invited to go over to India. We went first of all to Delhi and then to Mumbai before the COVID, and we presented soul regression therapy at the conference over there with Dr. Newton Kondaviti. And they run past life reincarnation conferences every few years over in India. And he has a really big movement over there. What was he saying?
There's nothing that surprises me about that. There's something I want to tell you. Like, of course, you probably know about the Ayurvedic medicine, and that came from India, Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Am I here?
Yeah.
You know about the Ayurvedic medicine. It came from Indian medicine. And then, but like when Esdale, then he was a mesmerist doctor. When he went to India, the people the Bengali people were accepting him, and he would using he would people into anesthesia. So, but the British medical establishment, they gaslighted Esdale, and they said that people of Bengali wanted to be operated on just to please them. So the Indian people, I think, are very, very much so open, and it's very much so their culture to accept hypnotherapy. You know what I mean? But I'm just wondering, when you say it's an ancient therapy, how ancient is ancient? What was the Native Americans, were the shamans, were they doing this? Like what do we know? What do we know about the ancient civilizations and their relationship to either past life regression therapy or to hypnotherapy?
Well, I think through reincarnation, there's a lot of belief, ancient belief in reincarnation, and just having multiple chances and karma, and having multiple chances to relive your life again, and it's more openly accepted there. I guess it's just it's ingrained in them, and it's never. That's one good thing about it. It's never been taken out of their society. In Western society, we probably going back before, you know, for want of a better word, before religion got involved, we were probably more as paganistic and open to the concept of reincarnation, and we probably accepted it. But of course, we've now been directed, down a different path, and a mainstream path in order to believe that sort of belief is a bit out there. Or the same way we're now told that people are conspiracy the theorists in the world.
If you think against the mainstream thought pattern.
Yes, if you go against the mainstream thought pattern, and I don't think that's been removed. The people in the Eastern countries or Eastern philosophy, they haven't had that taken out of them. They've still maintained their beliefs. And you've only got to visit the countries and see the ancient buildings and culture that's there to understand that the core belief system is still in place, hasn't been taken out.
That's right. That's right. I mean, getting into like aliens and other realms and realities. I mean, sometimes when people have a past life regression, their life is on another planet, or it's another reality. It's not Earth, which are very interesting. There's a lot of research done on those types of different lives. And the ancients drew on the caves, the aliens my daughter, just to share a story, is doing a lap of Australia at the moment with her husband, who was in the military, in their caravan. They're towing the caravan with a Jeep. And she was just up in Darwin. And we've only just come back from Darwin because it was her 50th birthday last Friday. So we flew to Darwin and we celebrated her birthday. But while she was there, she contacted her father's family that had been like, no one really knew of them. And this family was her uncle, and her uncle had married an Aboriginal. And the family in Brisbane didn't really know about them much, and they weren't talked about. Because that's what Australia's like. It's like, the Indigenous have been rejected right from, day one. And anyway, my daughter was able to connect to her Aboriginal family.
Yeah.
And they took her to Kakadu, and they took her to places, sacred sites that people can't go to unless you're invited and you are part of the family. So you can't just go there. It's sacred land. You have to be invited. And they took her to caves, and she saw the art, from the ancient Aboriginals. And I mean, they drew pictures of aliens with these big heads
with the helmets.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something we would like to look into now. She has that connection. But I mean, they knew there was something else way back then, but it's not, mainstream. And if you want to know about that, you basically class as a conspiracy theorist. It's never talked about in mainstream media or anything.
No.
Lorna, that's true, and I love Freud, but before I was going to sort of a Freudian orientated school, I mentioned wanting to do parapsychology, and the psychologist nearly wanted to exorcise me, and but I also remember when Carl Jung mentioned it was all right for a while with Freud, but then when he started mentioning aliens and sort of the collective unconscious and parapsychology, Freud nearly had a heart attack in the train, and that was that. So it just shows you that psychoanalysis wants to be so much more, with likes of even with Adler, even with Ferenczi. These were all wonderful thinkers. Even he mentioned Rank. He was like orgonomy and energetics. These were actually quite interesting thinkers. Okay, Freud, I'll give Freud his due. He was great, but he abandoned hypnosis. But I still love reading his books. They're very addictive. But there's so much more. And Carl Jung was definitely telling me there's so much more because he was.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that we have enough material.
Yeah. What was that?
I don't know. I didn't hear that. But
I think we have enough material, guys. I think we have enough material. I think it's time for you to eat your breakfast. It's probably time for me to get some beauty sleep, or I'm going to end up looking very old today.
It's just morning
Thanks so much
here,
for
9 o'clock and Sunday morning. So, well, thanks for that, Michael. It's been really wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you. Have you eaten your breakfast yet?
No, we just had coffee, that's all.
yeah,
Oh,
we just had our coffee. We'll have some breakfast, and
We'll get on with our day. But you know, if your listeners want to know more about us, well, our book is available on Amazon, as you know.
that'd be great. Yeah.
And also we have a website where we train people. So if anyone is interested in learning how to be a past life regression therapist, our website is the hypnotherapylearninghub.com. It's international, and we already have over 100 students.
yeah, there's 120 odd down there.
Yeah, and all training is online. So, but we do come on and mentor them on Zoom once a month. So.
Yeah, well, it's past life regression therapy is like I will say one thing that like what I love about it is like you've got a lot of hypnotherapists and they're still hungry for the next damn technique and suggestions and scripts. I'm not like that. I think you should be more spontaneous, and that's how I did my interview. And that's why I think we enjoyed it because it was a spontaneous, conversational, intuitive, not too formal. Welcome a client.
Yeah, we teach our students that.
Now I'll go to sleep and you go and breakfast. Bye for.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Michael. I don't know if you're still there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You have a lovely day. Evening.
Bye now.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
I'll press the leave button.
I'm glad.
You